1980s to a certain extent, but several factors intervened. Not Roswell, not necessarily abductions, other problems like lack of funding, again, like of the fact that no progress was being made.
The lack of concrete results led some ufologists to question their beliefs, and they divided into two camps.
In the late 1970s, something interesting happened in ufology. Criticism began to come from within. Skeptics had been regarded as rationalists who knew nothing about the UFO cases. Now the situation began to change, and longtime believers, who had felt strongly about the subject for years, began to say, "We don't believe in them anymore." In 1977, French ufologist Michel Monnery wrote a book called What If UFOs Didn't Exist? According to the author, UFOs are nothing more than a misinterpretation of known phenomena. They're not real, they're only a myth. There are no aliens visiting us, and there are no strange phenomena. They were just mistakes made by confused people who saw Venus, weather balloons, aircraft, the moons, and other explainable phenomena.
UFO hunters were gradually becoming more aware that merely gathering witness accounts was not enough to fully understand the phenomenon.
What was happening in ufology in the 1970s when the first skeptics began to appear within their ranks? It was a time when, having discussed eyewitness accounts at length, UFO researchers began to think, we need to be more scientific. There's a price to pay. We have to change our methods. It's not enough just to gather eyewitness accounts. We need to produce evidence, like scientists do. For a long time we thought that it was a scientist's job to observe nature. But in reality, a scientist's job is done in a laboratory. He very rarely sees nature. He spends his time looking at instruments, diagrams, and graphs. So his contact with nature is very remote. If he goes into the woods or on top of a mountain, he doesn't see anything. He's in the middle of nature and can't do anything. UFO researchers began to ask themselves, how can we present data relating to UFO stories so it'll be perceived as scientific? They realized that there was a price to pay, that they would need to do more than gather stories to succeed, or simply state their opinion like a judge or a police officer. They would need to delve into the facts and come up with items that would allow experts to decide if there was a case or not.
Francois Bourbeau belongs to this new generation of UFO researchers that appeared on the scene during this shift in ideology in the 1970s.
My first job, or my first goal, I should say, was to interest the university crowd in the study of UFOs. But I soon came up against a brick wall, from social prejudice to a wide variety of other prejudices. These men and women from universities were probably afraid of losing credibility among their peers. I would say that it also had to do with a lack of knowledge of the subject area. I must admit that in the field of UFO research, for serious amateurs like myself, who want to dig a little deeper to understand an issue, there is a fundamental lack of funding required to do the work. There's also a lack of human resources available. And to be perfectly honest, we also have very limited access to technology that would allow us to perform rapid tests on the spot, where physical evidence appears on the ground, for instance. With these tests, we could advance our own research, since we are on the front line, thereby eliminating a layer of analysis where we have to wait for the results before proceeding. We could also turn over our test results to experts for further research. Maybe that's where the problem lies.
A really good example of how this lack of funding and logistics can have an impact is the case of Saint-Marie-de-Manoir, a small rural town less than 60 miles from Montreal, Quebec.
At first I was sure that it was a 4x4, but when I got up and looked, I saw that it was over my neighbor's house.
It was blue everywhere in the house, and there was this persistent noise in the background.
I think it was something from outer space. I think they might be more advanced than us since they are coming to visit us.
It was bright everywhere. I'm not sure how far away it could be seen, but it was as bright as day where I was.
Several experts find this case to be particularly puzzling. UFO researchers involved in the case had to cut their investigation short, since they lacked the means to continue. François Bourbeau was one of the key figures in this affair.
The incident in Sainte-Marie-de-Mont-Noir was probably one of the best opportunities in scientific terms to pursue an in-depth study of the case. First of all, there were many witnesses, and several different types of witnesses at that, including highly competent ones, such as police officers.
I was amazed. I'd never seen anything like it before in my life.
Several levels of society were represented among the witnesses, and there was physical evidence left on the ground. Electromagnetic effects occurred in the immediate area, and a trace of the craft was left on the ground. This incident happened in winter, and the grass turned green where the UFO mark was found. Using my own money, I paid Laval University to analyze grass and soil samples. Chlorophyll levels were 10 times higher, and nitrogen had gone up by 300%.
I found it very bizarre, because the chlorophyll level should normally have been the same everywhere. I don't think it's humanly possible to fake chlorophyll levels in plants in November.
We had material on our hands that could have been genuinely investigated. But somehow we missed our big opportunity. We didn't succeed in capturing the interest of enough people in the fields of botany, physics, electricity, magnetics, or mathematics. We didn't get plant geneticists involved in our project. A lot of work could have been done to rule out natural causes.
Over the years, UFO hunters have gradually divided into two separate camps. One group represents the diehards, who still believe that UFOs are extraterrestrial in origin. The other group, mainly consisting of UFO researchers, define themselves as skeptics.
It appears that ufology is not the work of a single group of individuals, but rather a network of groups, like in the field of science. In my view, the fact that there are skeptics does not mean that ufology has become more scientific in approach. It means that researchers are starting to think like the people they used to criticize. Nowadays, skepticism about UFOs is a matter of personal opinion, just like believing in them used to be. It's not much different. After believing in UFOs for years, they decide not to believe anymore. What effect does that have? Rationalists say finally UFO researchers are becoming more scientific, but if we look at the facts, it just isn't true. Just when things were calming down and researchers were beginning to use a more scientific approach, the controversy started back up again. After having said they exist, they were turning around and saying they don't exist. Well, saying they don't exist doesn't make you a scientist, but it does spark controversy. This controversy is not making the field any more scientific. Since each person is proceeding according to their own personal opinion, it's very easy to become a UFO researcher. You have some business cards printed and publish an article in a few newsletters. It's much harder to be a scientist. You need to have diplomas, experience, and research work that's approved by others as a group.
The UFO field has been faced with two problems: frequent shifts in ideology and a lack of funding for its work. Victims of precarious budgets, most UFO associations cannot hire paid staff. This means that almost all of their members are volunteers, with the best of intentions, no doubt. But inevitably, they run into problems with the availability and competency of their members, which leads to less than ideal investigations. Fascinated by the subject of UFO since the mid-1970s, Antonio Junius, a writer for Fate magazine and co-author of the UFO briefing document, is quite familiar with the problems faced by UFO researchers.
One of the main problems of ufological research is the lack of funds. This is very bad, and especially when you go to even to other countries, it's even more acute. And there was a short period, I would say through the 90s, where you suddenly had this emergence of the philanthropists.
In the late 1990s, U.S. multimillionaire Lawrence Rockefeller financed a series of meetings on the American East Coast. Chaired by astrophysicist Peter Sturrock of Stanford University, California, the Pocantico meetings are now considered to be the most important initiative that has taken place in the field of UFO study over the past few years. Francois Louange is an optics specialist who directs Flex Image, a corporation specializing in satellite imagery. He was an active participant at the Pocantico meetings.
The Pocantico conference, organized by Mr. Rockefeller in 1997, was highly instructive. This gentleman, who has large sums of money, tends to spend a lot on artistic and human causes. Lawrence Rockefeller had a certain curiosity about UFOs in general, and crop circles in particular. So he financed this week-long meeting at his Pocantico Center where his family had once lived. The idea was to discuss physical evidence, not just for UFOs, but in general.
Basically, you had two types of scientists. You had ufological scientists. These were people who were professional scientists, like Vallée and even Velasco and Richard Haynes and John Schussler and many others, who made the case for ufology, and they presented, the best landing cases, the best photography, and so on, the best radar cases. And then you had a panel of neutral scientists, and these were people who were neither in favor nor against it, but they were professional scientists.
The goal was to have researchers speak about UFOs in front of a group of scientists, in the hopes of finding common ground and preparing a small booklet on their conclusions. Why did Rockefeller do this? Because up until that point, the only thing that existed in the field was the Condon report that had been sponsored by the U.S. Air Force several years earlier. The very thick Condon report was read by few people. It contains a lot of information, some of it on inexplicable phenomena. However, the official conclusions of the Condon report go something like this. First of all, we didn't find anything. And secondly, science has better things to do with its time than waste it on a subject like this that is of no interest. Condon closed the books on the subject, and scientists did that too. With regards to the Condon's conclusions, we agree at least on the first point. We didn't find anything really convincing, any absolute proof that unknown phenomena are occurring. And we found even less evidence of extraterrestrials. On the other hand, as to what science's position should be, we are diametrically opposed to Condon. We feel that given the evolution of the information gathered and the technologies at their disposal, it would be in the best interest of science to research the subject intelligently, to listen to UFO researchers, and to continue the work.
If the Pocantico conference led to a recognition of the interest in UFOs, then why does the science community at large seem so uninterested in this phenomenon?
If someone were to find a technological application for the UFO problem, then just watch the benefactors line up to finance it. Maybe not UFO groups at first, but if another meeting were held with Mr. Sturrock, there might be a group of people who would say, "Aha, we're being offered 10 million, gentlemen. Go back to your drawing boards."
However, before we can speculate on how to interest the science community in UFOs, we need to have UFO groups themselves come to an agreement on the importance of the information gathered and the manner in which it is presented.
The material itself, the data, although there are some excellent cases, but it is very ambiguous, and you can basically adapt it to any theory you want, because you will select those elements of if you're interested in the more bizarre cases, you will find plenty of those. If you're interested in the more sort of sober, you'll concentrate with radar and pilot cases. So that's what I saw, that people, because they had a theory, then they were like digging up for those elements in the database that would support their theory.
After so many years, it may be surprising to find that so few professional researchers let themselves be carried away by a scientific interest in UFOs. Perhaps we are simply seeing a contrast between the ideal vision of science and the unorthodox reality of ufology.
One of the great failings of UFO research in the Western Hemisphere anyway, and not as much in Europe, but certainly in Canada and in the United States, has been the failure